Hi, yes, I'm Kit. I'm a philosopher. We start in Hyderabad, in the university. We're in a tunnel of bamboo trees. I'm heading for the philosophy department. I'm going to give a talk there on science or geology or something. And there weren't many students at the talk. So I asked one of them, a young man, afterwards, "Where is everyone?" And he said, "Listen, this is India. There are too many people here who don't have food and water. Too many people who can't get a job. Too many people who are struggling for basic respect. Philosophy is for the elite," he said. "We don't have time for it. We've got more important things to do." It's an idea that I've heard 100 times, but never so clearly. And at the time, I believed it. I mean, it just seems like philosophy is so pointless. It seems like a luxury item. Philosophy is it's like the car racing of the intellectual world, right? I mean, don't get me wrong, it's fun, it's thrilling. I love my job. But it's just not the sort of thing that you would expect people who are struggling at the hard edge of society to be able to do. I mean, what do we do in philosophy? We ask questions like, why is it the case that it's easier to work out what happened last month than it is to work out what will happen next month? What makes me the same person as woke up in my bed this morning? Everyone knows that murder is wrong. Only the philosophers have the luxury to wonder what on earth makes it wrong. It seems like philosophy is just for the elite. That's what I used to think. And now I've seen more of the world. Now I know better. And today I want to take you through what changed my mind. There's actually scientific backing for the idea that people who are poor, people at the hard edge of society, won't be interested in philosophy. About 75 years ago, there was a guy called Maslow, and he came up with a theory called the hierarchy of needs. Here's the hierarchy. So we start off with physiological needs, things like food and water and shelter. And then you've got safety and security. Then you've got belonging, being loved. And then esteem, getting that respect from society. And right at the top, you've got self-actualization. Now, people who are self-actualized, who satisfied that need, they're flourishing fully as human beings, right? They're really expressing themselves, living their life. So maybe they paint, but they don't paint for money. They paint just for the joy of painting. And something else they might do is they might philosophize. It's actually one of Maslow's examples. And Maslow's core idea is that we start at the bottom of the pyramid. And we only feel that need. We don't feel any of the higher needs until that need is mostly satisfied. And then we move on to the next one up. So that someone who's lacking basic food and water, according to Maslow, that's all they're going to be thinking about. And that's the only need that's going to drive them. They're not going to be interested in safety and security, let alone in self-actualization. And someone who's interested even who doesn't have basic respect in their life, right? So they haven't got the esteem need satisfied. That's all that's driving them. They're not interested in self-actualization. So according to Maslow, anyone who doesn't have these bottom needs satisfied just won't be interested in philosophy. And Maslow's theory has been tremendously influential. It's standard in psychology textbooks. We teach it in almost every management institution in the country. It's in our newspapers. It's in blogs. It's in podcasts. There's even a series of TED Talks about it. So you'd expect that there's a lot of evidence for Maslow's theory. You'd expect that he went out and he talked to people who are not fulfilling various needs and asked them what they want in life. But actually, Maslow didn't do that. Maslow said he was sick of psychology focusing on people who weren't doing well in life, people who are mentally ill. He wanted to use psychology to help us understand how to become flourishing human beings. Now, I think here Maslow made a mistake. If we want to use psychology to help us understand how to flourish, we need to study not just the people who are flourishing, but also the people who aren't. But anyway, Maslow set out to find people who are at the very top of the pyramid, right? people who are fully self-actualized. And first, he looked towards college students, and he got through about 100 of them, and none of them were self-actualized. Too young, Maslow said. So then he went to look amongst his peers, and he found a few people he thought might be self-actualized, but when he went to talk to them about it, they laughed it off, or they just refused to talk to him at all. So Maslow went to the only source he had left, history, and he found two people he was pretty sure were self-actualized: Thomas Jefferson and Abraham Lincoln in his later years. And there were a handful of others he thought might have been self-actualized: Eleanor Roosevelt, William James, Spinoza, a bunch of mostly dead white people. And he studied them, and that was his evidence for his theory. So why did Maslow think that if you don't have the bottom needs satisfied, you don't feel the needs higher up? Well, he just thought it was obvious. Here's what he said. Take someone who's really short of food. For them, their idea of heaven is simply a place with food. Everything else is defined as unimportant. Freedom, love, community feeling, respect, philosophy, they're all waved aside as fripperies because they don't fill the stomach. This, he said, cannot possibly be doubted. It's certainly true. Top tip. If anyone's being emphatic, it might be because their evidence is just too weak. And that seems to be the case here. Maslow, he's just guessing. And since then, we've done more research, and we know that Maslow's guess was wrong. So about 30 years later, a few scholars got together and they summarized the research on it. Here's what they said. Some of Maslow's propositions are totally rejected, and the rest, questionable support at best. Their idea was that Maslow is something we all know is basically wrong, but we still teach it. And since then, we've done more research. We've found out that not only do people not feel the needs in the order that Maslow says, we don't even satisfy them in that order either. So people who don't have their safety needs satisfied, who are in serious danger, will actually not spend time getting safe. They'll spend time and energy getting respect. And other parts of the intellectual world have filled out the story. So the MIT Poverty Lab, it's done a lot of great work studying people who live under 99 cents a day. And most of these people are literally starving, right? They have too few calories to do the day's work. So if Maslow was right, if we gave them more resources, more money, then they would spend that getting calories. Calories should be the only need driving them. But if you give these people more money, actually, they won't spend it all on food. They'll spend an awful lot of it on festivals, satisfying a need you'd have thought is right at the top of Maslow's hierarchy, self-actualization or respect. And when they do get food, they don't even get more calories. They spend about half of the extra money on changing up their food for better tasting food. So in India, people swap millet for rice. Rice is much less efficient calories per rupee. In China, they swap out vegetables for meat. In fact, in China, quite often, if you take someone starving and you give them money, they'll end up having less calories because they'll swap their vegetables for meat, which is much more expensive. And there's a bit of an indication that that's happening in India too. In all segments of society, we've been getting richer. And yet, in all segments of society, including the bottom, our calorie intake is going down. So, Maslow's guess was wrong. The science is in. But we should have known that it was wrong. I don't know who this chap is. He's a philosopher, I guess. Some of you might have been there, the bottom of Maslow's hierarchy. Some of you might have had those years where you were struggling for food, where you couldn't eat for days on end. Or you might have been struggling for basic human respect. And you'll know that you still had the desire to self-actualize. You'll know that your interest in philosophy isn't changed if your life has changed. And I know too, from my own life, because I'm lucky enough to get to spend time in lots of different corners of society. And whether I'm in the bad end of a remote village in rural India, or I'm in Delhi University. Whether I'm working with people on the streets of England or I'm in the poshest university there, I find the same mix of people. You've got people who are just not interested in philosophy, doesn't grip them. And then you've got the woman who has been homeless since she was a child, been a prostitute, who's gripped by the question of what it is to be a person, right? Who thinks about it, talks about it, even reads about it, week after week, month after month, until she's got her answer, until she's satisfied, and then she's on to the next question. I could tell you about the farmer who's barely able to get by, but who wants to sit and talk for hours about whether even God could make murder right. And he wants to listen too, because he's desperate for his answer. Not only is this picture that poor people are not interested in philosophy against science, it's against common experience too. And yet there is a sense in which philosophy is for the elite. Not in that it's pointless. Now, there's a certain sense in which philosophy is pointless. So, finding out what it is to be a person isn't going to help put a roof over your head. It's not going to feed hungry mouths. But even if philosophy in that sense is pointless, being a philosopher is tremendously useful. It's because as you're trying to answer these very difficult questions, you pick up a bunch of skills that you can use to help out make the world better. And there's good evidence for this. So the exam which you do if you're going to go into graduate school in America, we can look at that, we can look at the data from that, and it's a huge sample size. And what do we find? We find that in terms of quantitative reasoning, people who have been doing philosophy for a few years, well, they're not the best. They're not as good as the physicists, but they're better than the accountants. They're better than the business guys. But they are the best at analytical writing. And they're by far the best at verbal reasoning. In fact, overall, philosophy is the best possible preparation for these core skills that you can use. And I go out and I talk to leaders of NGOs in the field, and if they know what philosophy is, they say, send us more philosophers, we can use them. We can make the world better with them. So although philosophy might be useless, we choose to make philosophy the sort of thing where poor people at the hard edge of society are just not welcome at the table. And that's wrong, and that should change. So, if I could go back in time, back to that bamboo tunnel, back and talk to that young man who thought that philosophy is just for the elite, what would I say? I'd say this. Go out into the gullies, go into the fields and listen. And you'll find people like you, people like me, people with that same philosophical vision. You'll find that philosophy is not for the elite, philosophy is for humans. And when you've found those other people, you can begin to serve them. Thank you.